Alright, so I'm going to do a intro into Marmoset. So it's not going to teach you everything about it. I'm just going to show you a workflow so you can get an understanding of how it works, different settings to do. And I thought what would be quite nice is to show you a workflow that is quite popular on ArtStation. So if I jump over to this, yep, you can see if I search for material, we get a lot of people rendering their materials on these spheres. And it works quite well because if we jump into them, we can see how the material is being affected on the sort of curvature. We get nice lighting trying to bounce around the sphere and sort of going into all the crevices and details. And it's just a really nice way, and obviously industry proven way of showing how materials are working with lighting, with curves, and all that good stuff. So what I'm going to do is we're going to dive into Marmoset and look at how to sort of make a render that looks pretty similar to this. So I'm just going to pause the video and then I'll open up Marmoset. Now I will point out that actually I've already got my materials. So I've got my sort of albedo here. I've got my ambient occlusion, my displacement, my normal, my roughness. And by displacement, I mean height map or sort of tessellation map. So I've got my materials ready. I just want to go and show off how to render these in Marmoset. So I'm going to open Marmoset and I'm going to open Max as well and just create the sphere. All right, so I'm just inside Max, and like I said, I want to put this material onto a sphere. So I'm just going to go ahead and create a sphere. That will do. I mean, we can tell it's quite low density. So if we press F4, we can see actually it's quite low. And if you remember, tessellation is a way of moving the vertices using our sort of height map. So we need to make this sphere a bit more dense. Now I want to take into account that actually using tessellation, the more verts we've got, the more it's going to chug our machine. So I'm going to use a subdivide. And let's just so subdivide isn't doing what I want it to, so what else can we do? It's an open subdiv. Oop. Okay, well let's just stick with a turbo smooth. So let's give it a couple of divisions. I think that is going to be fine. Actually, you can see at the top it's sort of the topology has been a bit ruined, but it should be fine for sort of a view like this. So I think that will be fine. I'm going to collapse this down actually. So we turn this turbo smooth into an editable poly, and I'm just going to go ahead and make sure actually that it's on one smoothing group, so it's completely smooth. And I'm going to make sure it's in the middle of the scene, so the pivot is right in the middle there. And I'm just going to export this. So let's export selected. On my desktop, there's a folder that I've set up. I'm just going to call this sphere. And again, keep it as an FBX so we can keep the smoothing groups. And there we go. So now let's go into Marmoset. So hopefully you've used it before. If you haven't, it's quite simple. We've got our viewport here. We've got our material over here, and then we'll have the properties where we can import things into our material. And then we've got all of our scene stuff, so whatever is running inside this viewport over here. And then underneath that is the settings for each of the sort of bits we're going to click in. I want to import my sphere image, so I'm just going to go up to File, Import Model. And I'm just going to go ahead and find that sphere. So I'm just going to delete this material. Oh, interesting. You used to be able to delete them. I guess you can't this time, but yeah. So there's a sphere. If we press Control F or It should frame it nicely for us. It looks like it was already framed perfectly. You can see if I move the values for this material, we can see actually the roughness goes down. We can turn it to metal, so it's completely reflective. And this is where we're going to start adding in things like our subdivision and then all of our sort of maps. You'll also notice that because I've put the mesh in, we now have this object in the scene, so sphere. So what I'm going to do is, first off, we're going to give it those materials or textures that we have. So really easy, we could drag and drop it into here, or we can just click inside this little viewport which shows a little view of what texture we've got. So I'm going to click that, and in fact it's brought up where this mesh was saved, so it's local working folder. I'm just going to plug those normals in. We have a roughness map as well, so I'm just going to pop roughness in, and our albedo. So, and then we don't have a metal map, so what we can do actually is just drag down the value of metal. So if you remember, anything white is a value of 1, that means yes, it's metal. Anything 0 is black, it means there's no metal in there. Now we've got an AO map that I want to put into this. So let me just move the camera. You can do that by holding in the viewport, holding shift, holding down the left mouse button and just dragging them to the side, and it'll spin your lights around. So I'm going to go into that a bit more and setting up nicer lighting, but I just want to get the lighting on the front for us. But you can see down here we've got optional maps. So I want to put some occlusion on. So you can see we can't actually do anything because we need to enable it first. So let's go to occlusion, click the little arrow and click occlusion. And you can see we can now pick ambient occlusion. And then we can change the strength of that as well if we wanted to. So I want to show off my displacement map. Now you can see right at the top here, we've got subdivision. And in fact, if I click on the sphere, you can see it pops up a wireframe for us. We can actually go into our render options on the left up here, and we can tick wireframe, and we can show the opacity of the wireframe there. If I put this on, and then we go over to our right and go into subdivision, and then we can use flat or we can use PN triangles. We're going to use PN triangles, so what it's going to do is subdivide each of those meshes with triangles. You can see we've got a slider up here as well. We can drag this down to sort of decrease the tessellation, and then we can drag it up to a value that's incredibly high. Obviously we use more processing power, but you can see it's gone pure white, and actually it is tessellated, but it's so heavily tessellated that it's showing the wireframe as being quite strong. So let's just drag this down a little for now and turn off the wireframe. Now obviously it's not tessellated any information yet, is because we don't have a map plugged in. So let's give it a height map or a displacement map. So just move the light around a little bit more again. So underneath our subdivision, our tessellation, you can see we have displacement map. Again, it's turned itself off. So we can use height or vector data. Now, I know we've got a height map, so just again, we'll go in and we'll pop in that map. Now, that looks crazy, and that's because it's pushing it out at this value here. So it's moving them as far as it can. And if we go ahead and turn on the wireframe, you can see actually it has taken that geometry and it has taken the vertices and it's mapped our height map to it and pushed them out. So you can see if I decrease the tessellation, you'll see the detail and the noise starts coming. If we increase it, it gets a lot sharper and it gets more noisy because we've got more vertices popping in. So it's all about finding the right sort of balance. So I'll pop it for that, and then what we'll do is we'll change the scale of our displacement map, so just bring it down a little bit. So if I spin around there now, you can see it's broken here at the seams. That's fine, we're only really going to be looking at it like this as a portfolio shot. In game, obviously, this would probably be on a plane, so it'd be quite flat and would work a lot better. But That's looking good. I can obviously bring it all the way down if I want to. And let's just have a look at this wireframe. So let me bring it down as much as I can and start bringing this scale up, and you can see it's pushing the verts and the geometry where it needs to. So I'm just going to tweak these settings a bit. Pop that up. Let's bring this down a little. Something that looks quite nice like this. Now, this is quite big, and that's because I have a tiling texture, but it's just using it as a value of 1:1. I probably want to scale the entire texture a bit. Now, if you were doing your barrel render, you'd probably put your mesh in, and it would have UV maps. Sorry, a UV map, and that means whatever is on your UV as a texture, that would map 1:1. But because I'm using a tileable texture, I want to actually just increase how much it's tiled by. So you can see right at the top of all of these options, we've got something called texture. Now this runs just some anisotropic filtering, but we've also got texture tiling. So if I move this, it will tile all of these for us. So if I start bringing this up, you can see actually it's tiling that texture multiple times. Now you need to be careful when tiling. We need to really use a power of 2, so it tiles properly at the seams, so we're scaling it uniformly. So let me put 2 in there. See, that looks starting to look a bit better. But obviously the sort of tessellation needs a bit of tweaking as well, as the data for the displacement map is sort of scaled down, so the textile density is lower, which means it's got a bit more noisier. So let's just bring the tessellation up again, because I noticed around this brick area, see, when I bring it down, it sort of goes blurry. So need a good amount of information, but I'm just going to scale the power of it down a little bit, just so I'm getting a nice silhouette around the edge. And again, I could hold Alt and spin around the object if I wanted to. I'll find something looking nice. Maybe pop the scale a bit more. I'm just looking for a nice silhouette, but then showing off most of the texture work as well. So there's a lot of bricks missing here, and I don't really want to be showing that off, but I want that to come in to play. So actually having it something like there. So we've got some nice bricks. Maybe it's just look just slightly underneath it. Bring the lighting around, give it a good check. Yeah, so I'm quite happy with that. Maybe just this bit's annoying me here, so maybe we just bring that in a tad more. Moved it out a tad actually. Let's pop the scale. Okay. So if I wanted to do a little bit more tweaking, we could actually offset it on the U or the V axes. So if I wanted to bring the texture down a little bit, I could scale it down a bit more. And it's just panning the sort of texture around that vertical axes. So maybe have a look. And if we wanted to offset it, it's almost just like spinning the mesh. So I'm going to leave the offset at 0 and just have a tweak around until I find something that works quite nicely. That was good. Okay. Happier with this sort of image here. So I'm quite happy with that. I just want to start now thinking about how we're going to render this out. So if we go up to capture and then an image settings, you can see actually we're going to capture an image that's 1920 by 1080, and that's probably not what we want. It's probably going to be too wide to just focus on this. And a good way of actually seeing what Marmoset is going to capture is if we go to main camera, there's something called, where are you? Save frame here under the lens, so we can tick save frame. And you can see now we've got these sort of boxes across the top and the bottom. What I like to do is change the frame opacity to one, so we can see exactly what we're going to capture. And there's a lot of wasted space here. So if I put this on a portfolio and I was just having the one image, it's quite distracting. You're not really focusing on the texture. You're not making the most of the pixel space on the screen. So I'm just going to go up to capture settings. And I'm in fact going to change it to 1920 by 1920. Let's press OK. And you can see now we've got a square render set up. We're going to be capturing a nice square sort of image of this. So I'm quite happy with the sort of composition of it, the way the tessellation's working. What I need to do now is start setting up the actual render sort of settings, so the lighting, the environment it's in. And we can do that under sky. So if we click sky, you can see we've got something called a Hdri map. And that basically is an image capture thing that will go around the whole scene. So if I change this backdrop mode to okay, where's it gone? So there is a way to show the actual image to sky. There we go. We can see the background. So if I turn off the blur and up the brightness a bit, and then shift and left click, we can see as we're turning around, actually our camera's sort of locked onto our mesh, but we're actually moving around the environment. So the lighting is coming from the locations it should do and working in real time. Now, there is a bunch of presets. So let me change this mode back to blurred sky. And if we click presets up here, you can see we've got a bunch of different sort of Hdri maps that will show you different locations. Now, each one has different lighting. So it's about finding one that works and sort of expresses your materials correctly. So if I click forest path, you can see actually we've got a much more greener lighting tone across it. And that's because we can see on the image here, all the lighting sort of bouncing through the leaves and giving us a nice green tint. You can see hedgerow, so maybe that's more suited to where we'd naturally find sort of bricks. You can see actually it's picking up the roughness map a lot better. The lighting's more natural, it probably belongs there. Desert roads, quite a harsh sort of sunlight. So it's all about just clicking through and finding a setting that sort of works for you quite well. So smashed windows, maybe, it's a brick wall that's inside. Castle sunset. I think actually the indoor fluorescence really picks up the details, but I think it's overly lit. It's far too powerful. But we can tweak it. So Land's End. I'm thinking I quite like hedgerow. It's looking quite nice. Got evening clouds, light day fields. So that sort of works. It's not about finding something that's absolutely perfect. It's about finding something that we can then just tune and work with. Now it might be a case that actually this house one shows off my material a lot better, but it actually doesn't belong in a house. That's fine. We can sort of hide the background, change it to a color. So if I get to mode color, you can see it's now in a grey background. So it's just about finding one that works quite nicely. So I quite like how Desert Road's looking. Let's have a look. You can see as I've now put a flat colour on the back, my eyes are focusing a lot more on the texture rather than the background, so I'm noticing more sort of details. So let's see, I liked hedgerow before, now I'm not so sure. So quite liking the look of this one. So enough of me tweaking around. I will find one that I like and resume the video from there. All right, so I've decided I quite like the Ooh, what's the name of it now? I have lost it. Where's it gone? The evening construction one. And I like it because it's quite a flat tone. It sort of scatters the light quite well. And if we look at the sky, we've actually got some light coming in from the sides, but overall it's a nice sort of overcast, sort of flat colour. Now this is really going to come to life once I start changing the settings of the Hdri map and start adding in custom lights. So what I'm going to do is change the brightness of this because it's just a little too dull. So I'm going to increase it to about 8, and again holding shift and left clicking around we can stop moving that light and the environment around, and you can see it's doing a much better job now. It's still a nice flat, but then also we can click anywhere on this image to start adding in child lights. So I'm going to add one in up here, and then I'm going to add one in down here as well, and you can see up here it says now Skylight 1, Skylight 2. So you can click on these, you can see we get this gizmo. So what I'm going to do is just bring it over into our renderer just so we can start editing it. So let's drag that up here. You'll notice we now have our X, Y, and Z coordinates, but we've also got this faint yellow arrow. And now this is showing us the direction of the light shooting out. So I'm just going to point it sort of to our material. Give it another rotation around, and then let's click Skylight 2. And we'll do the same. We'll pop this one down here, but can't see the arrow pointing correctly. Oh, it's right there. So let's just move this in a little. And what I'm going to do is actually make this sort of a warm tone, and then this one will be a sort of cool tone that sort of comes up sort of behind. So it gives us a nice flat lighting overall, but then we've got some sort of warm and cool highlights. Now, what we're going to do is start tweaking all of these lights. So these lights came in with settings from the Hdri map. So you can see we clicked on an area and it sort of took that color value of where we clicked and that sort of brightness of the map and set our light up like that. And you can see that the lights have moved because I've moved them around the scene. But now I'm just going to, what I like to do is, first off, I'm going to set this to a coolish tone. So it's at the yellow. So let's just move this up to cool sort of blue, like so. And then just so we can see it, we can really crank up that brightness. So pop that on about 15. I think it's too blue, so let's just slightly darken it. And obviously it's not going to stay like this, but it's perfect for us to start now rotating this and seeing how it's actually sort of affecting our mesh. So let's start tweaking it a little bit so we start getting the shadows on there. Looking at the fall off really as well, so we can see how it's scattering across and how the shadows are doing. So we're just going to keep trying to tweak it so we can pick up the curvature quite nicely. I think the lighting's gone a bit too flat there, so we're just trying to get some nice shadow detail in and pick up some nice highlights. So it's looking a bit more natural. And then on the other light, so light 2, I'm just going to make this a warmer tone. So let's just drag it down. Maybe give it a sort of a browny colour, but more towards the white end. And again, let's crank this up as well. So let's give this about 30. Let's crank the other one down a little bit just so we can see what's happening here. And again, just going to start rotating this so you can see how the light is going around. So we can bring that in quite a lot, which is starting to really pick up the indents here and the cavities, which I quite like. And again, we can always move it as well. We can move the light if we need to, but let's just find something that looks quite nice. So we're trying to just flatten out the colours so lights are coming in at other ends, opposite ends, and obviously it's in shadow information from one side to the other, but we just need to sort of try and flatten it out, but really show the cavities and pick up the thing. So this is looking quite nice. Now I'm thinking this is probably a bit too dark, so let's just slightly lighten that up a bit. And with our skylight being extremely blue, let's actually try and pop that more to a sort of purplish tone. And just tweak the lighting slightly. So obviously it's very bright, so we can see what we're sort of dealing with. But that's a nice similar tone. I quite like this feature where it shows us similar. There we go. So that's much better. That's picking up lighting a lot more. So just with those couple of lighting color tweaks, you can see the sort of changes it has. So I'm just going to copy this color value and just start clicking on the tweaking. So I think this is too sharp. I'm too far away now, so let's try another similar. Just warm it a bit more. That's good. Let's just slightly darken that. Right, so you can see this lighting is making it look a bit more realistic now as well. We've got some shadows in the dark areas. It's nicer lit at the top. We've got a good sort of view. And again, we can go in and tweak our environment, but it sort of moves those lights as well. So let me just undo. Not always the best thing to be doing, but we can just go ahead and tweak them if we need to. See, as I pan around, it's looking quite nice. I'm just gonna do it about there, I think. So I've just slightly tweaked the scale of my displacement map, got it to look a little better. Now I want to talk about just slightly changing a couple of render settings. So the first thing I like to do is turn on global illumination. Obviously it uses more computational power, but it bounces light around the objects a bit more better in the scene. So if I tick it on, instantly you'll see we've got more accurate lighting, especially if you look in the top left here. Got sort of darkness coming where the light sort of meets the curvature, and we can start seeing all these micro facets a bit more on the surface. Now, we can change the details as well, so we can render that a couple of times over. And if it's not working for you, we can click Show Voxels, and you'll see this big black box. And all you need to do is scale this voxel box until it sort of goes over the entire mesh, and that is where the sort of light is bouncing around. And we can turn on Ambient Occlusion as well, and we can give it strength. So if I bring that up, you can see it's darkening those areas a bit more. I might turn it on a little bit, give it some nice strength. And then we can change the sort of softness of it as well, so the occlusion size. So is it sharp? Is it harsh? Does it sort of soften off a little bit? So let's have a tweak. See, if I drag it all the way down, we can start seeing inside quite well, but if I bring it all the way up, it sort of softens it quite nicely. So just keep your eye on this bit as I sort of drag it down and then up. So it's all about finding what works. Yeah. So now we've got something called local reflections. So that does really good stuff on, say, metal maps or things that aren't rough. Obviously, it won't do much for us if I tick it on because this is quite a rough sort of material, so light isn't bouncing off them that well. That, I think, is all the settings I want to change in the renderer so far. Let me have a look, see if there's anything else I've missed. Shadows, we can change the resolution if we need to. I'm just going to leave it on high. But we can sort of bring the slider up and down. It's not doing much because I've not ticked it, but you can see sort of almost like the fall off for the shadows. So See, it's quite sharp shadows, and if we bring it up, you can see it's bouncing and softening those shadows out of the area a bit more. So just have a tweak around until it looks quite nice. You can see it's sort of, as I drag it down, it's hitting this surface in the middle and sort of spreading out. So you can see it start coming into effect here and sort of bouncing around. So let's just tweak it until it starts going to the edge of our mesh, like so. So that's looking quite nice. And looking at this light now, I think it's probably a bit too harsh, so I'm just going to slightly bring down that brightness. So we can give it some nice shadows, but kind of want to pop that detail just a little. So there we go, that's looking nicer. I'm just going to, in fact, click on the sphere, press Ctrl F again, just to make sure it's framed, and just zoom in a little bit. There we go. All right, so I'm just going to have a really quick tweak. Ooh, too much tweaking. See, to me, it looked quite stretched, so I'm just going to come in onto my tiles and just slightly increase the spacing a bit. Just, sorry, decrease the spacing so it doesn't look as stretched. I think that's looking a lot better. But you can see here, I'm starting to see the seams. So what I'm going to do now is go into our camera and start tweaking some settings on there. So we've got field of view here, so that is simply looking at sort of the degrees of how we're looking at a model. So you've probably edited your field of view in games. And you can see if I decrease the field of view, it starts zooming in. And if we scroll out of the viewport, you can see we're looking at it as a much flatter, almost orthographic view of this sphere, which doesn't look very nice. If we increase it, you can see it zooms out quite a lot, but if we scroll in, increase it a bit more, we get more of a perspective view on it. So you can see the middle appears closer, and then the top and bottom start really falling away, sort of in the background, like so. So I'm just going to play around with this till something nice appears. So let's have a look at a value of around 50, maybe 54. I mean, we could go completely extreme and do that, but it doesn't look natural, sort of at the top and the bottom. So I'm just going to bring it down and put it to more of a, let's try 60. 60 is looking okay. Let's compare that to 45. Yeah, so let's try 60. I'm just going to slightly bring it down, maybe 55. There we go. So you can see just changing that field of view gives us a different sort of camera lens perspective on it as well. What I normally like to do afterwards as well is you can see we've got a flat color on the background. So if I go back to the sky, what I like to do is turn this color to black, but let's bump our backdrop brightness way up. And it should have gone right. There we go. So yeah, let's put it to ambient sky. So we're using the sort of ambient sky, but I'm just going to make that a white value. Now it's awful, but what I'm going to do is start putting some fog in that will sort of pick up the lighting that we've got sort of scattered around. So if we go up into the top here, we've got something called new fog. So we can click that and you can see it's put a fog in, and it's sort of shrouded our object because it's quite close. Now I'm just going to move the distance so it sort of goes into the background. You can see it's kept out at 1000 and we're still getting fog. So let's just manually update that to about 5000. Still quite a lot. So let's try 10,000. And let's just bring that opacity down a little. And I'm just going to change the fall off to linear. So it's more of a sharper sort of fall off. Let's just give it a color. So let's give it a more of a sort of reddish tones to sort of match. And you can see we've got almost a gradient looking thing going on now. That's because it's picking, the fog is picking up the lighting information from our two lights that we put in the scene. So if I spin around, you can see the background starts to change, and it's a good way of showing sort of lighting without, you know, people who are viewing it sort of looking hard for what sort of lighting colors there are. So we can see it's gone a lot warmer, and we can see that's because the fog is showing that actually there's a lot of warm colors coming through. So we can change the light value on the fog as well, so we can see how much of the light it's picking up. Let's just go ahead and just change the overall tones a little bit more. Make it a tad warmer. I'm just finding something that sort of matches. So you can see now if we turn the fog off, we've just got the white background. But the fog is now picking up our lighting information. So I'm just going to change the distance of the fog again, maybe bring it a bit closer. We can change the opacity again, or we can really increase it. So I'm just going to go for something like that, I think. Maybe drop the lights down a bit. And then we can always go back to our sky and sort of change this brightness in the background too, so we can have more of that color coming in if we want to, but I think something on the value of about 19 is quite nice. So see, as we start moving across, we can see it's picking up those color tones a lot better. So again, let's just go ahead and make this a bit warmer, a bit more flatter, get rid of those reds showing. Yeah, we can see that's nice, a quite cool flat lighting, and our background is showing that. So quite happy with that. So what I'm noticing is that actually the shadows are quite sharp. And what I'm going to do is go back to our second light and start tweaking the shadows a little bit. So we get more warmer shadows, it's not as dark as it's looking. We can do this just by, well, what's interesting is we can click into the light. Under shape, you can see we've got something called visible shape, so we can tick that, and it should show the sort of shape of our light for us. You can see the axes it's pointing in, sort of the X. So let's start bringing in that X a little bit. You can see it's almost reducing the depth of it. So let's bring that in a tad so it sort of warms up those shadows. And let's have a look at the Y. See the shape's changing now. I think the Y is fine, it's not doing much because it's dispersing from that area around. But we can change the width as well, so just sort of adjust the sharpness of those shadows. So you can see we've gone from that to just gradually bringing them in so they're still there, a bit warmer. I've got my eye focused here until I find something I like. I'm just going to go ahead and check. And this is still quite sharp, so if we turn this light off, actually that is coming from the other light, so let's go into there. Again, let's make it a visible shape. Turn the width, so this will scale it sort of uniformly, sort of adjust the blurriness of the shadows. So let's just make them a bit blurry, a bit softer. And again, we can just pull that back a little bit. So I'm going to make it a bit more sharper. And I think down here, actually, it's not giving us enough. So let's drop these length back down. It's looking quite nice. I think the rest of the issues are probably coming from the global illumination. So if we go back into renderer, I'm just going to change this brightness. So you see we can increase it, sort of washes it out a bit. We can darken it. just let me undo. So we're at a value of 1. Just want to warm it up a little bit. So this is the how bright the bouncers are sort of going around once it fires those rays. Another thing we can do is change the fit size so we can increase it. And that's just going to give it more area to sort of bounce in, sort of lose that light, so it sort of warms it. We can change the resolution from medium to high, and then maybe just bring this down just a tad. So we're getting almost an albedo look. Let's just warm it up a tad. So see, my machine's chugging quite a lot now because I've turned on the sort of tessellation of it. But that's looking better. It's more even lighting. It's probably a bit too light actually, so I'm just going to turn the brightness down a touch more. And then again, let's have a little spin around. So see how it's sort of looking when we stop moving that lighting across. Good. Another little thing I like to do is use something called a shadow catcher. So this is good for assets rendering, but we can add that up at the top. New shadow catcher. What that does is add a little plane into our scene. Will normally give you a shadow, but obviously we've done so much sort of fog and shadow issues that actually we don't get a shadow. And obviously, when we're rendering it, we don't really want to see a shadow on it. But if we add it to the scene, so if I hide it, you can see it's giving us a little bit more sort of surface to bounce lights off. So shadows are becoming more in depth. You can see it gives it a sort of overall gradient and really makes things pop. So what I like to do is add one in. And all I'm going to do is make it go um, quite far down the y-axis. So let's say minus 300. So that's disappeared. It's not in view of the renderer, but it's still really making sort of details pop. I'm just going to go back in my lights and turn off visible shape. And it's starting to look quite nice. I think we are nearly there. All right, so let's start doing a little bit of post-processing in Marmoset. Really make it sort of pop. So before that, actually, what I like to do at the very end is go into our render and turn on Cascade Shadows. Now, I know I did that earlier, but you can see it really helps the crevices, but it does really tank your sort of machine. So that's okay turning it on at the end as well. But if we go now into main camera and sort of scroll down to the bottom area, you can see we've got a bunch of post effects. And there's a bunch of presets as well. So put noir on, it sort of does that for us. Purple drank. But what I like to do is give a bit of sharpness to this. So I'm just going to drag the sharpness value up. And that's far too sharp. So let's find something. 1.175 seems quite nice. And then there's this sharpness limit here. So it sort of gives you a nice sort of soften fall off to the sharpness. So we can bring the limit up and say, make it as sharp as you want, or we can sort of bring it down and say, just go easy on the sharpness. I think I might just lower the strength a bit. Again, because I've got Cascade Shadows on, it's just taking a little while to sort of fix its renderer. I'm just going to tweak the scale as well of the tessellation. So I'm noticing it's quite a bit of a mess at the top. So there we go. Maybe we need to just bring the triangles down as well a little. So Let's just go for it. That's fine. Right, so sharpen is done. Bloom, I don't really touch that unless I need to. That's just really sort of giving blooms to our lights. You can see it can be quite painful to look at. Now, vignette, I quite like. I normally like to have it very subtle, but you can see if I drag this up, we start giving it a vignette. And then if I change the softness, you can see it sort of changes how soft that sort of fall off from here to like down here is. So what I like to normally do is just bring this just to the edge and then just increase that softness a little bit. Maybe send it backwards a little bit more. So there's a little bit of vignetting, sort of directs your eye into the middle, but it's not too sharp. And then grain, let's just turn that down a bit. I don't really like to have any, especially as we've already upped the sharpness. But that's looking good. Now, above all sharpen, bloom, vignette, and grain, we've got tone mapping. So we can tweak the exposure, so that'll be the overall brightness of our scene, so we can very, very gently bring it up. So maybe 1.095, and then we can bring the contrast up too. So let's just that's looking good. And then the contrast center, I'm just going to bring that to 1, and that'll basically start the contrast off more in the center. In fact, let's just bring. Let's leave the contrast as it is, and let's just bring that exposure up a tad. That's looking better. And then saturation is obviously the colors, so we can make them pop, or we can sort of get rid of them. I think I quite like how they are. Just upped it just a tiny bit. But you can see actually there's a button here called curves as well. So we can actually go in and change the channels entirely. So you can see I've got RGB. We can just slightly bring those curves. Or we can go in and say, okay, these reds far too sharp compared to everything else. Let's bring those down. So I don't normally like to do the channels separately, just maybe just a little tweak on the RGB. And there's a couple of presets too. So we've got bleached, awful. Let's have a look what Matrix does. Sort of greeny, nice Instagram filter. Can give it a warm sort of preset. Too warm there. But contrast, that works quite nicely. Maybe we can just bring these pins in a tad more. A little bit of tweaking. Maybe just up the exposure a bit more just to slightly compensate. So that's looking quite nice. Again, we can spin our lights around and watch Marmoset chug. But I'm quite liking where this is at. So post-processing done. I think, do I want to tweak the lights a little bit? Maybe flatten out those shadows a bit more. Trying to decide. So it's all about just fine tuning and tweaking. In fact, this looks a lot better than what I had before. We're sort of getting a nice warm, a nice cool. We've got some nice flatter shadows. Maybe we could bring it in a bit more. I think that's too warm now and too dark in certain areas. So Shift Z. Just toggling between the two. Yeah, I think I prefer this one. So almost there. I think one last thing I want to do actually is just slightly bring the exposure up just a touch. Eek. So it's all about fine tuning and tweaking. But now let's go ahead and add a depth of field, see if that will do anything for us. So in the render, is it? To try and remember where it is. Is in the main camera. Where are you? Am I being totally blind? Oh, here we go. So it's in the main camera, under lens, and then I'm just dropped down focus. So we've got an option called depth of field, so we can tick that. It starts washing out our image. And then we've got something called sticky focus. So I'm going to tick that. So that means if we move the camera, everything will sort of stick to this, so the depth of field will stay. And what's great is while we've got depth of field ticked, we can middle mouse click anywhere on the image, and it's going to set that as the main focus point. If I middle mouse click in the middle, you can see it's focused on there and it's sort of washed out the back. Now, to me, it's still very much washed out, so I'm just going to slightly reduce the bokeh size. Just bring it up to a tad, maybe the far blur. We can drop that just a little bit, maybe up the bokeh size. I think the near blur is fine because we middle mouse clicked it. It's just about changing the blur and how much it's blurring. So there we go. So I've increased the far blur quite a bit. I've lowered the bokeh size, and that's looking quite nice. So we can see the tessellation. It's not as sharp, but we've got the main focus in the middle there. So I like this. I'm going to save the scene. And then I'm just going to save this as Marmoset demo. And what I'll do is I'll upload this Marmoset file if I can. And then what I like to do now is just take this into Photoshop and do a little bit more post-processing if it's for the portfolio. So I'd like to show my albedo, my roughness, my normals, my height, and so on. So we can go up to capture and we can capture the image, or we can capture it, save it and open it. But I'm just going to use image to clipboard. So if I click this, it'll take some thinking and hopefully my voice doesn't lag, but there we go. That's done that. So now if I open Photoshop, let's click create new, and it will see what I've got on my clipboard and sort of automatically give me a file size. So once this opens, we can paste that in, and there we go. In Photoshop, we have our image ready for some extra little post-process. So I'm just going to rename this as render, and then we'll go from there. So there is a plugin that I like to use for Toolbag, which is free. You can pay the artist if you want to, but it's called Channel Scanner for Toolbag. So if you just Google that, it's the first Gumroad sort of thing, and it's this. So basically, it's just a shader plugin for Marmoset, which will render or keep all of your settings, your tessellation, whatever, but render out an image using whatever channel map it is. So you can just say an even fair price, so give them a dollar or something. Look, I want this, and then you'll be able to download it. So once you download it, it's just a zip file, and there's some instructions in there. So all it's saying is copy channelscanner.frag to C program files, Marmoset Toolbag. So I'm in this location. So I'm in the shader. So I'm just going to go into the matte, and then we've got something called custom. So now we just need to pop it in there. So first off, I'm going to open Marmoset and see I'm on version 3.0.8. And all I'm going to do is save the scene again and make sure I close. So I'm going to find 3.0.8. So it'll be this one. I'm just going to drag this in there. So once that's copied over, let's open Marmoset Toolbag again, and let's open our scene. Like so. Now, if we click into the material and scroll down to the bottom, we can see we've got something here called extra. We can click that and we can enable that custom stuff. So let's do that. And then from our shader, we should be able to click channel scanner.frag, and you can see it disappears. So this is a bug with the shader, and that's because it doesn't have the ability to read the metal map properly. So what we need to do is go back onto our material, find our metalness, which is here. And we're just going to change this to specular. So once that recomputates everything, you can see it's working, but it looks washed out, it looks wrong. Don't worry, because we can change this specular to sort of have metal, because there's its own metal in here. So if If we scroll back down into this channel scanner, eventually we should see use metalness. If we tick use metalness, untick the texture, and let's just drag that metalness down. You can see now it's back to what it was before. This is overriding the specular from earlier. So using this, I'd like to sort of take a couple of renders of all of our maps. So let's just scroll up. You can see channel 1 is disabled. Let's just make that just an albedo. And you can see it's split it into two. I don't want to take a picture of this sort of split, so I'm going to tell the mask clip here. I'm just going to remove it so the whole thing is albedo. Now, what I don't like is the depth of field sort of messes with this render. So just for these renders, I'm going to go back into our main camera, into focus, and just turn off depth of field. Now, if I go up to capture, image to clipboard, you can see it's thinking about it. And if we go into Photoshop, we can paste. Because obviously it's captured the same aspect ratio, it sort of fits perfectly. So we can call this albedo. And another one I like to do to show off the height data better is to, let's just capture a clay. But that looks very bright and very white for me, so I'm just going to click this clay color and just slightly darken. There we go. So let's go back up to capture. Let's capture the image. And again, let's paste that in. So now we've got a clay. Cool. So I think the next step is to let's make a render of our albedo, our normal, and sort of roughness information. So we can do that by, let's change our clay back to albedo. Let's put channel 2 in as our normal. Oops, that's the world normals. Let's choose normal texture. Oh, in fact, let's just try normal for now. And then we can use roughness. And then we can finally use our ambient occlusion. Now you can notice these two are white, and that's because, again, we're sort of overriding the channels earlier. So let's scroll down and find AO texture. So let's click that, and then we can put in our AO. You can see now we can see the AO quite clearly. Now I'm not actually sure why we can't see the roughness. Maybe it's because it is quite rough anyway. Just going to have a look. I'm going to change the mask mode, to screen Y. Okay, are you not playing ball, Marmoset? There we go. And then the roughness is not coming through. So why is that? Why are you not working? So let's put the normal back to normal texture. See, normally down here there is a little button that says we're using roughness. So let me just have a quick look through. Right, so I found the issue. It was here where it says gloss rough. It was set at value, so it was using a value from the shader somewhere. So all I did was go ahead and change that to texture. Now you might notice these don't look evenly split. And it's just an issue with the render and the field of view camera. I think once we actually capture the image to the clipboard, and then paste this into Photoshop, it should equally split them? Yes, it does. So now we've got nice sort of overlay of our albedo, our roughness, our normal, sorry, our roughness and our ambient occlusion. So that's it really. Sometimes people like to sort of angle this X and Y renders sort of at angles, but now I've got some nice renders of things to put on ArtStation on my portfolio. So I've got a nice overall final beauty shot. If I want to show off the albedo work, there it is. A nice clay, so we can see the model. And then an overview, sorry, of all the different sort of materials that we've used. Now, maybe a bit more post-processing, so some background effects, maybe if you've used Substance, a Substance logo, Marmoset logo, or your name. But that's the basis of it. I've used most of the settings in Marmoset.